Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 essential battle pieces for beginners. This is really an interesting list, and it's an interesting list not just because the music is splendid and marvelous, but because it says something culturally about where we are as a civil society. It really does. I'm not kidding. I've arranged these pieces in what is basically a chronological order. I mean, not 100%, but more or less chronological. And you will hear and see as we go through this a progression from one particular view of battle to another particular view of battle. And what are those two views? Well, put very, very crudely, one is that war or fighting is good and moral, and the other is that war is generally bad and horrible, and the production of suffering. And so the representation of battle or struggle or killing or whatever it is in music changes. It changes as we get closer to the 20th century, as the horror of war becomes more manifest and more universally reviled, and as the depiction of struggle or battle in music becomes a little bit more stylized, more rarefied, more abstract, so that you're not actually celebrating the destruction or slaughter of whole other civilizations and societies or groups of people. I see that happening as a historian. I mean, that was my basic training, was as a historian. When I did I did two master's theses. The second one was on Orientalism in Western music. That is the depictions of Asia and the Orient. And you can see, for example, in French music, the progression from the description of far off or exotic cultures as decadent and immoral and unchristian, which of course they are. And so I had a couple representative works. One of them was Delibes' Lakmé. And in Lakmé, you have, the hunky white guy who is in love with the water carrier and whatnot, and she winds up killing herself or dying, but it's a clash of cultures. And there's no question which culture is the superior one. From the mid-19th century. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad music. I happen to love Lakmé. I think it's a fabulous work. And I think we should be able to enjoy these pieces completely divorced from their cultural objectification, the political correctness and all of that stuff. I don't buy into any of that, and you all know that. But you do see this change in philosophy from superiority of Western culture to the Ravel chanson mal de casse, where Western culture is the corrupter. It's the evil influence. You even see that if you're going outside French music in Madame Butterfly, where the Asians are the good guys and the white folk are the bad guys. That's the kind of transition that takes place. There is, at the end of the 19th century, this malaise, this view of Western culture as one in decline, as one of decadence. It made wonderful music. I'm all for decadence if it makes great music. I mean, it really does. But that's the philosophical underpinning. And you see that same project in these battle pieces. So I wanted to just throw that out there. So it gives you something to really think about as you listen. And I think that's important also for beginners, people who are just getting into classical music, to understand that there is a wider context in which this music was written. And you don't need to know that context in order to enjoy the music at all. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's there. It's really there, and it's something that really adds an extra dimension, I think, to the experience of the music, as long as, I hasten to add, that extra dimension does not become the raison d'être. It doesn't become the object in itself, because that's only for academics. For normal people listening to music, you just want to hear great music, and that's what this list is. But there is something else to think about, and so let's get right to it. And some of these pieces, of course, are extremely popular. I have left out the most popular. I've left it out deliberately, because you all know what it is. It's Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. And, I mean, that's sort of the iconic one. But I've given you 10 other ones because I figure, well, I just mentioned it, so you have 11. If you really, I mean, to be sneaky about it. But I wanted to do something a little bit off the beaten path. So here we go. Biber, the Battalia A10. Now, when someone says A10, that means how many individual parts there are. So there are 10 parts. It doesn't mean you hear 10 things going on at the same time all the time. It's just that it's written for 10 potential parts. And the Biber Battalia is actually rather amusing. It has a march. And it's just written for a little string section. I mean, Biber did not have big orchestras because he was a late, 17th century, early 18th century composer, and orchestras were not big in those days. In the Baroque period, there's a continuo, and so you've got the march, and then there's a wonderful drinking song where the soldiers all get drunk and sing in different keys, and it's incredibly dissonant and funny. And then there's a battle, and then there's the lament of the wounded, because he does feel something for the people who are getting killed in this thing. It's a very, very programmatic piece, and a very famous piece of Baroque program music. So Biber's Battalia is where we start. Next, we get Haydn's Military Symphony. Now, the second movement of the Military Symphony is the battle piece. There's not so much battle. There's one sort of battle moment. There's a trumpet call and a big timpani crescendo and a crash when everything goes nuts. And the reason it's called the Military Symphony is because it was from the military that the symphony orchestra obtained some of its basic instruments, including trumpets and timpani, which used to be ridden into battle on horseback, timpani, on either side of the horse. They were used to rally the troops and to indicate also over long distances what to do, to advance, to retreat. There were military tattoos. They meant something. They had real meaning. The same thing with hunting calls. It meant we found the prey. Go left, go right. Well, all of these military things had that. And so you hear a little bit of that in Haydn's Military Symphony. But the other military thing was the presence of percussion, the presence of cymbals and bass drum and triangle, which were Turkish instruments. They were used by the Turks in the 17th century for their siege of Vienna, which failed, but their instruments did not. And as a result of that, musical subjects on Turkish themes, like Mozart's Abduction from the Seraglio, invariably required cymbals and bass drum and timpani, which were military instruments ridden into battle, the noise of which was theoretically supposed to scare away the enemy or frighten them, or into puffing up the opposing forces and making them sound bigger than they were. So Haydn's Military Symphony is extremely important because it's not a literal depiction of a battle. It's what I mentioned. It's a stylized battle. It's the concept of battle taken away from the specific circumstances of a battle. So you don't have good guys and bad guys. You just have battle, the idea of battle. And that's really where that more sophisticated and sort of less, shall we say, grubby and realistic approach to the idea of battle first appears really in Western music. It's a phenomenal and important piece for that reason. Then we've got Paul Wranitzky, his grand characteristic symphony for the peace with the French Republic. So that's got it's a grand characteristic symphony for the peace with the French Republic. It's the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and or the beginning of the Napoleonic Wars, or one of those things, and the French king is killed, and there's a funeral march, and there's a battle, and there's a whole thing. You can listen to it yourself. It's a lot of fun, actually. It's kind of like an early sketch for the 1812 overture in some respects, although the war is not between the Russians and the French in that particular case, but it's the Austrians and the French. But everybody was fighting the French, so it's a similar concept. Then, of course, there's Beethoven, Wellington's Victory. Now, Wellington's Victory has gotten a lot of guff because Beethoven himself referred to it as excrement at one point in a comment. I mean, I don't think he really thought about it that way, because I did a video about Wellington's Victory, and you should have a look at it possibly. He took great pains to make sure that it was performed extremely realistically and with great specificity, and it's a lot of fun. And it's the real obvious coupling for discs with the 1812 overture on it because it's got rifle shots and cannons and all those other things in it. And it's really fun. It's just tremendous fun. And he's very precise in indicating all of the pistol shots and muskets and things and where everything is lined up and how they all, crash at each other. And it's a big deal. So Wellington's Victory is a major, major battle piece, also called the Battle of Victoria, by the way. So, it's that thing. And then here's a piece that you probably don't know, Franz Berwald. Now, Franz Berwald was a fascinating guy. He was a Swedish composer who was a contemporary of Beethoven, actually, and Schumann and Mendelssohn, and he wrote 4 really fine symphonies, or at least 3 of them are, including the Symphony Singulière, his 3rd symphony, which is one of the great masterpieces of middle 19th century symphonic writing. And he wrote a lot of tone poems before Liszt was doing it. I mean, he was an innovator in his way, even if the style is somewhat Mendelssohnian. It's in that kind of style. And the Battle of Leipzig is one of these, totally unknown work, and enormously graphic and descriptive, and just oodles and oodles of fun. And now we're dealing, of course, with realistic battles as opposed to the Haydnish, sort of etherealized or abstract battle. So this is another realistic battle piece. Then we've got Schnyder von Wartensee. That's his last name. I don't need to deal with his first name because Schnyder von Wartensee is enough for anybody to deal with, and there is only one of them, so you can't go wrong. I don't even remember his first name, but I know it's Schnyder von Wartensee because I have the disc right over here if I want to go look at it. It's really fun. He wrote his Symphony No. 3 as a military symphony. It is a updating of Haydn's Military Symphony. It really is. I mean, it's quite a remarkable little piece of music, and oodles of fun to listen to. It's from the dates from the mid 19th century, and this is a composer. He's a minor figure. He didn't mean very much, but even minor figures can sometimes do very, very interesting things. Most of them at least have 1 or 2 good ideas in their lifetime, and this was one of them. Is it a great work of symphonic construction? Well, maybe not so much. Maybe not. But it's fun to listen to. It really is. And it definitely earns the title Military Symphony. Next, we go back to the realistic battle thing. Liszt, his symphonic poem, Hunnenschlacht. Yes, I love the title, Hunnenschlacht. The slaughter of the Huns. Yes, if you're a Hun, like Attila the Hun, this is the victory of the Christian forces over the pagan invading forces. And it's quite shameless. It has an organ in it. It's got a lovely Catholic chorale thing happening. And the slaughter of the Huns is most bloody and graphic and endless fun. It really is. I mean, you may not want to celebrate. Nowadays we feel queasy celebrating these things. And of course, so Hunnenschlacht isn't played very frequently. It's not considered one of Liszt's finer works, possibly because of its hedonistic and completely gleeful celebration of the slaughter element. But, it's the music that matters, and it is endless entertainment. It really is. Give it a shot. You won't be sorry. Then we've got Strauss's Ein Heldenleben, A Hero's Life. And here the battle is the hero versus his music critics. The hero is Strauss himself. The piece is all about his own life. It's either considered to be the ultimate in musical egomania, which it kind of is, or egomania in a parodistic and self-deprecating way, because it really is. It's a very over-the-top piece. The hero is excessively heroic. His girlfriend is a solo violin. She's incredibly irritating. She really is. And there's a love scene, which, as usual with Strauss, is quite graphic. And then the battle, while the girlfriend looks on from the side. She's there too, and they're watching the battle. And eventually, the hero defeats his critics and emerges triumphant. And frankly, that's where the piece should end. But because it's Strauss and because it's German, it doesn't. Then there's the hero's works of peace, in which Strauss quotes his own greatest hits, some of which were failures at the time. And then there's the hero's withdrawal from the world. and renunciation. And that, too, is a bit of a parody, actually. There's a story behind that. Maybe we'll go into it at some point. But it's 10 minutes longer than it needs to be. And everyone agrees that the most fun part of Ein Heldenleben is the battle, because it is a parodistic battle. It's cartoon music. Absolutely cartoon music, and deliciously so. Great, great fun. So after that, we have two examples of battles which are not described as such, but which nonetheless are battles. Very, very graphic ones. Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, the Leningrad. Now, the first movement is supposed to depict the battle of the Russians versus the Nazis, but it doesn't. It transparently doesn't do that. That isn't anything what happens. There are two tunes, and the two tunes kind of get into this thing, but the tunes are not recognizably German or really Russian. I mean, the Russian one is somewhat more Russian than the other one, I suppose. Bum ba da da dum bum ba da 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 da, that thing. But it's a battle. There's a snare drum rhythm like Ravel's Bolero. It's that's the rhythm, by the way. And I have in my book on Shostakovich my own theory about what the first movement is actually about that I think actually fits what the music does better than the external program and the story. But the piece was famous for that reason. It became famous because it was considered to be a work of protest against the invasion and the war, the German invasion of Russia. And although maybe it was, who knows? But whatever is going on, there's a battle in the first movement, a huge, major, tragic. It's a tragic battle. It's one in which there is no victory for anybody. If you listen to that first movement, you do not hear victory. You only hear a gross, tragic orgy of destruction. That's what it is. And that, quite frankly, is the modern conception of battle music, and the way in which it's so different from battle music from the 18th century and before. There is no justification for the relentless slaughter that Shostakovich unleashes in his first movement of the Leningrad Symphony. And whatever you think it is, I think that's the important thing to realize. And you hear it's something that really, I think, is a significant aesthetic and philosophical change in the way that battle music is depicted in the symphony orchestra. But finally, we go to a different kind of battle, a triumphant, a victory over some sort of forces, malevolent force of some kind, which remains in the abstract. So you can have abstract malevolence without having to actually kill anybody. You can have a victory, a struggle, and a victory. That's Nielsen's Fourth Symphony, the Inextinguishable. But Nielsen's Fifth Symphony does the same thing in its first movement. In the Fifth Symphony, you have a snare drum representing the evil forces, and the orchestra and the snare drum go at it, and the orchestra overcomes the malevolence of this crazy snare drum that's trying to stop the orchestra, but the exhaustion requires a whole other movement to sort of rebuild itself. In the Fourth Symphony, it's the finale. And in the finale of the Fourth Symphony, you have two sets of timpani set up on opposite sides of the stage, and they go at it. They go at it with these, they're tuned actually a tritone apart, that is a dissonant interval apart, which is kind of hard to hear in real life, but you get it adds to the sense of cosmic battle. And these timpani do battle with each other and with the orchestra, and there's just enormous, it's exciting as hell. My God, it's exciting. It's unbelievably thrilling. And finally, at last, there is a motto theme, which you hear right at the beginning of the symphony. It's the second subject of the first movement. It goes, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. Oh, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful, exhilarating, exalting theme, and it comes riding in on horseback. Well, not really, but, riding in at the end after the timpani have knocked themselves into a conniption of extravagant, violent, whatever it is, and the orchestra races away and bang, we have a glorious affirmative conclusion. After strife and struggle comes victory. The motto of the symphony is that music, like life, is inextinguishable. And that is where I think we should end it. This talk about different ways of depicting battle in music. And of course, go listen to the 1812 overture. I mean, I'm just having a little fun here, not putting it in. But that's it. And as with all of these essential talks, that's all we're talking about, folks. Add nothing. Talk about the music on the list. Please do not suggest anything off the list, or else I'll just delete the comment, because we're sticking with 10. And I really think that, or 11 in this case, but I really think it's important, as I've said, that especially when you're starting out, to limit what you're listening to. Not only are these some of these very unusual pieces, and they may be a little difficult to source, but even if you get a handle on all of them, there are larger issues to think about in this particular list. So I think 10 pieces gives you more than enough. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me, especially if you're just starting out. Have a good time with this stuff. There's so much fun in this music. There really is. And I just know you're going to enjoy it as much as I do. Take care.